Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming Diablo 4 on our first patch of Season 8, 2.21. With that, not a lot has actually happened. A few small buffs to non-meta builds really, bug fixes, and actually a pretty big bug fix for one of the boss powers. This patch fits the notorious boss power bug, which was pushing everyone with the worst builds higher in power than intended. In short recap, players could use the Flesh Reaper's Disruption boss power as their main, triggering stuns by consuming vulnerability effects. If you combine that with Varshan's Lifesteal mod, you'd also trigger damage from that, and combined with the Vampiric Curse aspect, you'd trigger vulnerability on everything really easy. It'd stun everything ultra often by proccing that boss power infinitely, and then deal damage from the Zir's power at the same time. With the patch, we have this, Flesh Reaper's Disruption. Reduce the frequency at which the main power will activate in extreme situations. Essentially, it cannot proc as often as it was, resulting in way less stuns and DPS from that combo. Now, unfortunately for Spiritborn, this was also very much their best build, and while you could definitely make great use out of it with other classes, it was essentially the thing holding Spiritborn together. They used it to jump up from their best pit clear of 96, suddenly up to an 111. With that fixed, they've taken a major hit that's not yet properly represented in the pit clear trackers. For now then, this means I can only fairly consider their true best clear with the best build that they have as a 96 again, which sadly means Spiritborn doesn't even make it into the top 10 best builds right now. Technically on that list it would be 11th, but that's far from ideal for a whole class. Hopefully we do see some results from the minor changes that they did implement, but it seems very doubtful at the moment. Either way, today we're going to blast through the 10 best builds right now based on the highest pit clears and the performance of these builds overall. 6 of these builds have great representation and are very clearly very good and easy to compare to one another based on their pit clears and the times of that. 7, 8, 9 and 10 are a bit more interesting and varied with a lot less representation, so obviously we want to talk about it. Let's work our way up from the bottom then with 10th place with this Minions Necromancer clear, where they had literally 1 second left in a pit 100. So it's pretty cool to see Minion Necromancer exist in any form in any relevant way, even though it barely makes it onto this list. This setup and build has a heavy focus on building into crit and crit strike damage, and they're triggering a ton of lucky hit through Lord Zir's Blood Pool as their main power. And just like, you know, the main builds of Blood Wave and Blood Spear, Wandering Death's mod skill, meaning you execute mobs when you're doing pit clear, and increasing your vulnerable damage through Harbinger of Hatred's Volley is pretty standard. If you're doing a summon or minion build then, Beastmaster's Training is an obvious choice as a mod because that's just a massive increase of damage for your summons. In this version of minion builds though, we're actually seeing no Golem. That's being sacrificed as you might expect for the critical strike damage increase from Iron Sacrifice. Otherwise, we have skirmishers with an increased number of them, which is pretty cool, and Shadow for your mages for the increased damage per active Shadow Mage. What I found very interesting about this player though is the fact that they're using the Grandfather. They're hyper-focused on maximizing the crit strike damage, so the Grandfather actually works for that. I find that hilarious because there's literally a new unique in this season made for a minion build, the Blade of Zir, which got buffed in this patch by the way. They've increased its inherent summon damage from 60% to 400%, so that's quite the buff for it. Will it contend with literally the Grandfather though? I'm not sure. Other small buffs from minion build is coming in though, like just a 20% increase to the Book of the Dead skill to priest damage bonus, and the main aspect of reanimation, that damage bonus is going from 25 to 45 to 40 to 60, so that's another noticeable increase. This is one of the few off-meta builds that's getting relevant buffs that could push it into more relevance overall. Will it compete with the best builds though? I don't think so, but hopefully this will push it from say just barely doing a 100 to maybe being able to do like a 105, maybe. Above that, at 9th place then, we have the Meteor Sorcerer, also with a pit 100 clear, but not with literally 1 second left compared to 10th place, so slightly better for sure. Meteor is by no means the absolute meta pick, but it is quite literally the only not Lightning Spear Sorcerer build run in the current known pit clears of a relevant clear that exists in the listings. So it is the only build that's actually pushed outside of Lightning Spear, so that's at least nice to see. Is it their best option overall though? I actually think that's well up for debate. If more people were trying to push non-meta things just to see where they could get in the clears, we might see a bit more variety than this. But for now, it's all we have, and it is technically worthy of 9th place in terms of its placement in the pits. Anyway, the idea of Meteor is to spam meteors, right? There's a unique that they need to do this properly, Starfall Coronet, which basically means as you cast Meteor, you get 3 extra meteors. It also changes the mana cost of the meteor and just gives it a cooldown with charges, so you try to maximize this, so that you're able to absolutely spam them. But unlike what we just saw with the minion Necromancer and direct buffs and increases for it, I wasn't seeing anything majorly relevant to this build in the few Sorcerer changes that came with this patch. So I'm not exactly expecting a big bump forward for Meteor. I'm more like thinking there's just not enough representation of the other top build options. Still, it shows that there is potential for this class outside of its one most popular build, if more people were willing to engage with it, so we'll see. Next up at 8th place then, we have a Pit 105 clear by a classic Mighty Throw Barbarian. Mighty Throw is by no means weak, and we went into the season kind of expecting it to be relatively strong. You might consider it like an A tier or something. The problem with Mighty Throw pretty much comes down to its inability to effectively clear packs of mobs. In the pit, that's not too bad because, you know, the fights last long enough against those packs of mobs. You're kind of condensing them and smashing them, even in a smaller AoE like Mighty Throw. But it does require some specific gameplay, a careful rotation, that kind of thing, which means it's not that encouraged or commonly used when it's not quite literally the best thing. Something easier and more enjoyable to play will always be encouraging to a player base. Anyway, it's incredibly strong in regards to single target, so that's where it shines really well. This player was able to achieve a Pit 105, and every 5 levels at this point means you need to basically double your damage, so it's noticeably ahead of the last 2 we talked about. Anyway, a lot of the build kind of centers around the unique, the 3rd blade. Your weapon mastery skills are now also core skills that have 100% cooldown reduction but cost fury. So basically, it's making it cost more to use, but then you get the cooldown reduction to be able to actually spam Mighty Throw. Just like any Barbarian build, there are a ton of ways you can stack different multipliers and modifiers onto your output. And as usual, Barbarian is incredibly expensive in, say, mythic unique goals and all the aspects that it wants because it's using 4 weapons. But as a relatively tanky class with really high-end potential as usual, it does creep quite ahead compared to other classes. We see that again with 7th place, which has another Barbarian build with a Pit 106 clear. It's Bash Earthquake. Earthquake was something that they really addressed, tackled and nerfed in the PTR and launch of Season 8. Season 7 had Earthquake as the top build for Barbarian, and they actually called out Earthquake build specifically before the launch of Season 8. They said they don't want the same build, the top build, to be the best build every single season for all the classes. They want it to change. So they made some efforts to do that, and they wanted Barbarian to feel more physical. So in the nature of Earthquake, where you're putting down these quakes and standing in them and, shattering the ground around yourself, compared to physically hitting an enemy with your weapon, it's kind of going against what they're trying to do. Despite that fact, we're still seeing a lot of reliance on Earthquake and modifiers tied to Earthquake in the top builds. Even the build that's Minion Barbarian, that's well above this, is relying heavily on Earthquake and Earthquake modifiers, just in a more interesting way. This is more direct, where, you're using it yourself. So with a strong mix of Hammer of the Ancient, Earthquake modifiers, the usual stacking of multipliers for Barbarian and Bash on top, is able to do pretty damn well in these pits. This 105 clear happened with about 50 seconds left in the clear, so it was a relatively close thing, and with there not being any relevant changes in the patch for this build in particular, I'm not expecting this to push much further than it does right now. But the fact that it makes it to 7th place on this list overall, and is essentially technically the top off-meta build, still pretty cool to see Earthquake do so well in the season where they really wanted it to not do well. Alright, so now we reach the familiar builds that I've spoke about quite a bit recently, so we're going to be pretty quick on them. So at 6th place, we have Cataclysm Druid. Yes, Cataclysm is still the ever popular build for Druid. At least there are some interesting changes here where players are starting to use en masse the Stone Burst skill, which as a channeled skill will not interrupt your provocation stacking. That's how you're getting your guaranteed overpower. And with snapshotting changed in this season, it's a lot harder to actually get it in any guaranteed way. So you have to carefully manage your provocation stacks to spend them correctly on juicing up your Cataclysm as much as possible. This can be done through many uses and interesting combos, say your boss powers, stealth effects, and carefully managing your rotation. Stone Burst can also work in other modifiers to increase the damage enemies take, which is pretty cool. And since the time that I saw this being popularized, it seems like every goddamn Cataclysm run that I see now is using this cool Stone Burst tech. Anyway, Cataclysm Druid is definitely the top build for Druid still at this moment, despite the patch where, you know, they're trying to make it so human form is a bit more encouraged. I am interested to see what the top potential of that is, but right now, Cataclysm Druid, most popular thing. Above that, we have the Rogue with Death Trap. And yes, it's certainly Death Trap. The only build that I saw that wasn't Death Trap that had any relevant ranking was a Barrage focused build, and sure enough, they were using the now nerfed boss power combo to AoE stun and proc and burst via that silly combo that Spiritborn was desperately clinging to. And without that, it's very much clear that Rogue's only option, but really good option, is Death Trap, which is all about just maximizing your cooldown reduction, having enough energy so you're constantly resetting your Death Trap. So you're essentially just one button spamming Death Trap as your main source of damage, which is fine because it's a pull-in, it's a big burst of damage, and everything else around that is just a modifier, like say pressing concealment, getting your energy back, and your other skills that basically just enhance Death Trap somewhat. It does require a careful balancing of your current amount of energy, needing at least 150 energy overall, and a constant restoration of that energy, so there's like breakpoints you must reach before it works, but then it's insane when it does. We're seeing a lot more players engage with a close quarters key passive at this point, and everyone's using Banished Lords to give them that guaranteed overpower on the Death Trap, just managed with some careful, well, energy management. Right above that, we have a placement of 3 and 4 together. The reason for that is because Bone Spear, aka Blood Spear Necromancer, and Blood Wave Necromancer are so neck and neck tight and comparable that I can't really put one over the other. If you twisted my arm and made me choose right now, then I would go with Blood Spear just because it technically has a slightly better clear. And I fully believe Blood Wave could clear the same thing or pull ahead, and often they do swap around. So I'm kind of letting them share the category of 3rd and 4th place. Either way, Blood Wave, as we know, is all about pulling enemies in and slamming the waves together. Through the tidal aspect, you're getting multiple waves, and through the Zir unique pants, you're basically slamming with 2 waves together. So instead of just 1 wave, you've got 2, and instead of just 3, you've got 6. They generate a load of blood orbs, they reset your cooldowns, you're basically permanently spamming Blood Wave on targets. This is a form of CC and a knockaround, which is great, preventing damage. You're hyper-stacking health, fortification, and that type of generation. The build easily would have been better than, say, Blood Spear in terms of output if they hadn't just capped the whole ultimate scaling. Now it's at 200% and you can't go beyond that as the part of the skill itself. And the Keseme's Legacy, the pants that make your waves slam together, they removed the something like 300% multiplication on that. So it took a major high-end scaling hit, essentially. Still clearly very good, but held to a certain limit where we appear to be reaching that limit at this time. Meanwhile, the Bone Spear or Blood Spear build is very cool, no doubt, but does require you play around your bone prisons and all the targets in there, as you constantly proc loads of blood spears from corpses and echoing blood spears from your unique helm. There were a ton of bugs for this build in Season 7, which essentially prevented it having any relevance. In the patch notes for Season 8, they fixed like a pile of issues with Blood Spear, only for more to crop up at the start of the season. So it's been a very buggy build, but as they've continuously addressed it, it's clearly got a lot more consistent and reliable, and has now begun to challenge Blood Wave in a serious way. So I think it's in a great place. At 2nd place overall then, we have minion Barbarian, which is still sitting at a 113 pick clear. This is funny because it does engage with the earthquake concept that they were so against, and it's also double funny because they made this season have a focus on physical Barbarian hitting enemies with its weapon. Meanwhile, the top build is about summoning minions that generate earthquakes that you stand in to enhance the damage of your minions, while you spin with whirlwind, essentially dealing no damage yourself, but just enhancing the output with the ancients. And familiar multiplier and damage scalers, like I say, standing in the earthquakes, but also fire damage, summon damage, bleeds in this build's case, and stacking a ton of cooldown reduction. It definitely doesn't feel like Barbarian is all that physical of a fighter right now, I don't think they've achieved what they meant to. However, on the other hand, I do think it's really cool that something fresh like a minion barbarian build is their best thing. It's not quite the same earthquake playstyle because the earthquakes are coming from one of your minions summoning them or creating them. So as a barbarian player, this should feel pretty different and fresh. Quite an exciting concept for what is not normally considered a minion related class. But at the top, as it has been pretty much the whole time, it's Sorcerer with the Lightning Spear. It's overwhelmingly the best build of the season because if you go look at the pit rankings and just scroll, you'll see like 90% of the rankings that are like over 110 are all just Sorcerers. And they're all using the same thing. Lightning Spear as the core center of the build. We've talked about it a lot, so very quickly, a lot of this is thanks to the overperforming enlightenment skill passive, or key passive rather, which with a proper setup is giving you over 50k% times bonus element to all your elements, which is ridiculous. And that also plays into your main boss power. Everyone's using the Sleet Ice boss power from Beast in the Ice. And enlightenment is giving a massive frost bonus to that, meaning it also hits like an absolute truck. Any build that leans on enlightenment is going to do well, but the best way to maximize that is of course Lightning Spear. The pit pushes are a little bit unfair. There's still a bug that's happening where you have that like 1 in 33 chance to trigger an overpower at the start of the pit run. If you do that, it basically means all of your lightning spears are going to overpower for the rest of the run, meaning you don't have to worry about engaging with making overpower work. The problem with that is it means you have to enter the pit, try for the overpower. If it doesn't happen, leave, reset, go in, try again. It's a 1 in 33 chance, so it's a pain in the butt. We only see the successful attempts, obviously, when we look at this stuff, and it basically makes the class look a lot better than it actually is. Like I've said, about 5 tier levels means you've got to essentially just double the damage, and this is how Sorcerer is doing it with this overpower trick. If it didn't have that, maybe it'd be a lot closer to Barbarian, but because it does, it's ahead. But yeah, no surprise there that the #1 build right now is still Lightning Spear Sorcerer, if you've been paying any attention at all. But yeah, there you have it. That's our updated list of the top 10 builds for Season 8 right now. Hopefully things do change at least a little bit from that balance patch, but I'm not expecting anything major right now. Mainly, Spiritborn desperately needs some love. I hope this patch would help, and I'm not sure it has. So we're going to have to see if the devs do anything about it. Until next time though, I've been Hollow, you've been you, and thanks for watching.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.